To pull back the layers, pun absolutely intended, on lasagna. But we aren't starting in some cozy old-school Italian kitchen. No, we're actually kicking things off with a surprisingly fierce front-page modern feud.
So picture this. It's the summer of 2003, and a group of British researchers make an announcement that basically almost causes an international incident. They were studying a manuscript from the British Museum, this 1390 cookbook called The Forme of Cury, and they found a recipe for baked sheets of dough layered with cheese sauce. They called it loseyns. Well, the researchers claimed this was proof that the dish was actually English. The British tabloids literally went into an absolute frenzy. They were declaring it fit for a king and proclaiming that the idea of lasagna having English origins was past a joke.
You can probably guess the Italians were not amused. The Italian embassy in London predictably and very passionately issued formal denials. Italian historians scrambled and quickly produced records that predated that English recipe by over a century. A spokesman even dared anyone to try and disprove them. But here's the thing. To find the real truth of this dish, we have to look much, much further back than medieval England or the Italian Renaissance.
Tracking this timeline to find the true ancient roots of this culinary masterpiece, we literally have to transport ourselves thousands of years back in time. We're talking way before the Roman Empire even existed. The ancient Greeks were cooking up this preparation they called laganon. And honestly, in a 4th century BC Etruscan tomb, there are images frozen in stone showing the actual tools they used to roll out flat pasta dough. Then, around 146 BC, when Rome conquered Greece, they brought this whole concept straight back home.
Now that ancient Greek laganon was incredibly simple. I mean, we're talking absolutely 0 layers, 0 cheese, and definitely no rich tomato sauce. It was actually eaten merely as a fried side dish. Just cheap wheat flour and water, flattened out, super thin, and dropped directly into hot olive oil. So yeah, an everyday food, but it totally planted the seed for everything that came later.
When the Romans adopted this flatbread, they gave it a Latin spin and called it lagalanum. But here's a totally hilarious historical twist. The Latin word lasanum, it originally referred only to the everyday cooking pot itself. Seriously. The recipe got cooked so often and became so wildly beloved that the name of the pot eventually just became the name of the meal. I mean, just imagine calling your favorite dinner the skillet. It's kind of crazy.
Okay, fast forward to the 4th or 5th century. Here, the Romans established the fundamental architectural blueprint of the dish we'd actually recognize today. In this massive collection of recipes attributed to a Roman guy named Apicius, we see the very first instructions for laying thin dough with meats and broth. Now sure, those ancient fillings included things like sow's belly and fig-fed bird breasts, which would definitely clear out a modern dinner party, but the core concept of stacking layers, that was born right here.
Then the Roman Empire fell, right? And this recipe could have just vanished from history entirely. Poof, gone. Instead, medieval monks stepped up as the keepers of this old knowledge. In these dark, drafty stone kitchens heated by wood fires, they quietly kept the traditions alive. They actually transitioned the dish from a simple fried flatbread eaten on the side into a boiled, stacked creation that was served as a proper, multi-ingredient course.
And the reality of a 1300s recipe is just absolutely wild. The Liber de Cucina, which is one of the oldest medieval cookbooks from the Naples region, describes this heavily spiced, cheesy pasta stack. But we're talking intense seasonings here. Ginger, cinnamon, and this African spice called grains of paradise. And maybe the craziest detail of the whole thing? It was eaten entirely off a sharpened wooden skewer. Why? Because forks just weren't common in Italy yet. No way, right?
But we know for a fact that this cheese-layered version was utterly irresistible even back then. We have this amazing eyewitness account from 1284 where a Franciscan friar actually wrote down a note about a fellow friar. He watched this guy absolutely abandon all dignity just to gorge himself on the cheesy layers. It's such a perfect, highly relatable reminder that human nature, and honestly our absolute love for comfort food, really hasn't changed at all in over 7 centuries. By the late 1300s, the dish was so universally understood across Italy that a Florentine chronicler used it as a metaphor for something truly horrifying. He morbidly expected every single reader to understand a direct comparison between layered pasta and, well, the stacking of corpses in open graves during the Black Death. Yeah, it's an incredibly dark image for sure, but it perfectly proves just how deeply ingrained this layering technique was in their everyday culture.
Now, moving out of the Dark Ages and into the Renaissance, cooking at this point grew highly theatrical. The recipe leveled up from humble monastery food to a towering visual spectacle. It was literally designed to impress at the most powerful tables in the Vatican. The Pope's personal chef, Bartolomeo Scappi, introduced eggs and warm goat milk into the dough. Then he layered it with completely extravagant ingredients like butter, sugar, and cinnamon, and baked the whole shebang right into a cake pan.
Okay, but prepare yourself for a shock, because 1881, this number represents a massive, game-changing turning point in our explainer today. Why? Because everything we have discussed so far is completely missing the one single ingredient most people today consider the dish's defining feature.
That's right, for over 600 years of recorded history, lasagna was entirely white and brown. Tomatoes had reached Europe from the Americas back in the 1500s, but for roughly 200 years, Europeans flat out refused to eat them. They strongly suspected these bright red nightshades were actually poisonous. It wasn't until an 1881 cookbook published in Naples called The Prince of Cooks that chefs finally added the red tomatoes, and that completely shifted the trajectory of Italian cooking forever.
So as the dish modernized, two massive culinary heavyweights emerged, and they had entirely different philosophies. When comparing these two styles, you see Bologna demanded a super elegant, precise architectural approach. They used spinach to dye the pasta green and mandated exactly 7 thin layers of ragu and creamy bechamel. Meanwhile, Naples went in the exact opposite direction. They packed rippled noodles with as many hearty ingredients as physically possible, just loading it up with heavy local sausage, massive meatballs, ricotta, and mozzarella for the carnival season.
The Bolognese took their whole architectural approach so seriously that they actually took legal action. Fearing that the rest of the world was changing their masterpiece beyond recognition, the Italian Academy of Cuisine marched straight in the Bologna Chamber of Commerce in 1982, which is surprisingly recent, right? And officially deposited a formally notarized recipe just to protect the authentic, traditional 7-layer dish.
But honestly, they were a little too late to stop the spread. Immigrants and global palates had already taken the dish and rapidly made it their own. In the US, Italian Americans created these heavier, cheesier versions that were perfect for hearty comfort. In Eritrea, which is a former Italian colony, locals adapted it with a fiery Burberry spice mixture. And in England, yep, the exact country that sparked that 2003 food war we talked about earlier, it conquered the nation anyway, becoming a massive, top-selling supermarket ready meal. So, knowing that even the fiercely protected, notarized Bolognese recipe was officially revised again as recently as April 2023, mostly because the dish simply refuses to sit still, we really have to ask, where will 2.5 millennia of evolution take it next? Every single culture that has ever touched this dish has left its own layer behind. So think about your own favorite family recipe for a second. How exactly does it fit into this massive, endlessly unfolding history?